A millionaire CEO said, "God doesn't exist," but Jesus Christ answered him in person. The winds howled against the glass crown of Walker Tower, 78 stories above Manhattan, a place built by ambition, arrogance, and a man who believed he owed nothing to heaven. From the rooftop helipad, Ethan Walker, America's most feared and envied construction billionaire, stared down at a city glittering like a kingdom made just for him. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and yet, behind every lens, the same sentence traveled like wildfire across the nation. If God were real, Ethan said with a smirk that never reached his cold gray eyes, he wouldn't waste time on people who refuse to build their own destiny. God doesn't exist. Success, my success, is the only miracle I need. The crowd laughed nervously. His board applauded. Investors nodded, pretending the air didn't suddenly feel thinner. But not everyone celebrated his proclamation. At the back of the stage, his longtime assistant, Margaret Hayes, 62, lowered her eyes, not in judgment, but in sorrow. She had seen him rise, she had watched him harden, and she knew something inside him was cracking long before the world noticed. Across the rooftop, a young cameraman froze mid-recording. His grandmother had prayed for this man every night. His chest tightened. Why would someone blessed with so much spit on the very God who kept him alive? Down on the street, a homeless veteran leaning on crutches looked up at the broadcast on a store window. "Careful, son," he muttered through dry lips. "Pride's the highest floor before the fall." Inside the building, the elevator operator, who still kept a worn Bible in his jacket, whispered, "Lord, don't let this man destroy himself." The city heard Ethan's boast. Heaven heard it louder. What no one knew, neither the cheering executives nor the silent few whose hearts trembled, was that Ethan Walker would not leave this rooftop the same man. His words were not an ending, but an invitation. They were the final spark in a match he'd been striking since childhood. The moment that heaven decided to intervene. Because somewhere beyond the skyscrapers, past the storm clouds gathering over the Hudson, a different set of eyes watched Ethan's arrogance. Eyes ancient, gentle, and sorrowful. Eyes that had seen kings rise and fall, souls wander and return. Eyes that would soon look directly into Ethan's, on a dark, deserted highway where money, success, and pride meant absolutely nothing. And in less than 24 hours, the billionaire who mocked God would come face to face with Jesus Christ himself. Not in a church, not in a dream, but in the twisted wreckage of his own empire, where heaven finally answered a man who swore it didn't exist. Ethan Walker didn't just run New York's skyline, he owned it. From Wall Street to Hudson Yards, from luxury condos to billion-dollar super towers, every steel beam seemed to whisper his name. People called him the God of Concrete, a title he embraced with a casual shrug and a half-smile. But beneath that smile lived a truth everyone around him felt. Ethan no longer believed there was any power above his own. Inside the marble lobby of Walker Tower, employees held their breath the moment he stepped off the elevator. The polished floor reflected a man in a charcoal suit worth more than most people's cars. Sharp, handsome, impeccably groomed, yet cold as the stone beneath his shoes. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence alone tightened throats and straightened spines. In the accounting department, two junior analysts glanced nervously at each other as he passed. One whispered, "That man hasn't smiled in years unless there's a zero involved." On the 51st floor, an intern dropped her papers the moment Ethan looked in her direction, his gaze slicing through her like a blade. And down in security, old Marcus Price shook his head. "Man walks around like he built the sun," he muttered, "but every king forgets he didn't build the sky." Yet no one dared speak against him publicly. Ethan was brilliant, relentless, terrifyingly disciplined. He rose from poverty to billionaire CEO through sheer force of will. Investors worshipped him. Politicians feared him. Competitors studied him like a hurricane pattern. But those who worked closest to him saw a different truth. His assistant Margaret Hayes, a woman who'd served him for 15 years, knew every version of Ethan. Before the money, before the magazine covers, before the pride hardened into armor. She watched him bury himself in blueprints, in contracts, as if success could drown out something he didn't want to feel. At lunch, she quietly placed his mother's voicemail on his desk. "Ethan, sweetheart, it's Mom. Haven't heard from you in weeks. I just want to know you're okay." He didn't open it. He didn't even touch it. He simply pushed the phone away and said, "Delete it." Margaret didn't argue, but her eyes dimmed. Somewhere, she thought, that broken boy still exists. But he's buried under 200 million pounds of concrete. Later that afternoon, a board meeting unfolded with the usual applause and praise. Ethan presented a new skyscraper project. Sleek, massive, breathtakingly expensive. The room erupted in admiration, but one executive leaned toward another and whispered, "He builds these towers higher every year, like he's trying to outrun something." Across the city, in a quiet Brooklyn parish, Father Michael Hayes, Margaret's brother, heard her troubled voice on the phone. "He's lost," she told him. "I don't mean morally, I mean spiritually. He thinks he's untouchable." Father Michael sighed. "No one is untouchable, not even kings, not even CEOs. And above all of them, the city itself seemed to hum with a strange anticipation. Like New York knew something its people didn't. Like the wind was waiting for something to crack the armor of the man who thought he ruled the skyline. It wouldn't be wealth, it wouldn't be power, it wouldn't be fame. It would be a single night on a dark highway where steel, pride, and invincibility finally shattered, and a presence greater than any tower Ethan ever built would come walking toward him. Long before Ethan Walker became the man who ruled New York's skyline, he was a barefoot kid running through dusty Oklahoma fields, a boy with hope in his eyes and a father who believed prayer could build a better tomorrow. Those who knew him back then would swear he was gentle, curious, the kind of child who asked more questions about heaven than school. But life has a way of sanding softness into stone. Back in Stillwater, a small working-class town, the Walker family lived in a tiny wooden house behind a failing hardware store. Ethan's father, John Walker, worked as a carpenter, hands always calloused, pockets always nearly empty. His mother, Linda, worked double shifts at the local diner. They were poor, painfully poor, but they held on to faith like it was their only oxygen. John never ended a single night without kneeling by the bedside, whispering, "Lord, protect my boy. Give him a life better than mine." And little Ethan would climb beside him, kneeling too, eyes squeezed shut. Back then, he believed every word. But the world has a cruel way of testing faith. When Ethan turned 17, the house smelled always of medicine and fear. John's heart was failing. The doctor called it a time bomb, and without the expensive treatment the family couldn't afford, the countdown was merciless. Neighbors still remember Ethan sitting on the front steps, gripping his father's old hammer, staring at the sky with tears he refused to release. One night, John collapsed on the living room floor. Linda screamed for help, praying louder than she ever had. Ethan knelt beside his father, gripping his shirt, shouting, "Dad! Dad, stay with me!" But the ambulance came too late, or maybe poverty came too soon. The funeral was small but crowded with people John had helped for free. Families he built shelves for, neighbors whose broken fences he fixed without asking a dollar. They cried like they'd lost a brother. Ethan cried like he'd lost the world. Then it happened. The moment that changed the trajectory of his entire life. Standing over the casket, fists trembling, he whispered through clenched teeth, "If God is real, he wouldn't let good men die begging." His mother tried to hold him, but he pulled away. The pastor tried to speak comfort, but Ethan's eyes were burning with something new. Not grief, but betrayal. People in town still remember seeing him storm out of the church, kicking the gravel so hard it scattered like sparks. A neighbor, Mrs. Carmichael, watched from her porch and whispered, "That boy's heart just broke in a way prayer can't fix." But she was wrong. Prayer could have. But Ethan never prayed again. Instead, he buried his Bible in an old shoebox behind the shed. In its place, he picked up a blueprint, his first one, and swore to himself, "No more miracles, no more waiting on heaven. I'll build everything with my own hands." From that day forward, the soft-hearted Oklahoma boy faded, and in his place grew the unbreakable, unbending CEO the world would one day fear. But pain never disappears. It only sleeps, waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect night, the perfect highway to wake again. The night Ethan Walker sealed the $10 billion super project, New York pulsed like a living heartbeat beneath him. Limousines lined the curb outside the Aston, Manhattan's most exclusive rooftop restaurant, where tables were booked months in advance unless your last name was Walker. Inside, the room glowed with gold light, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of people desperate to impress a man who no longer believed in anything but himself. Executives, foreign investors, and political power players filled the private dining hall, each one trying to get close enough to Ethan to bask in his success. He stood at the head of the long marble table, Armani suit immaculate, expression carved from confidence and champagne. Tonight wasn't just a celebration, tonight was his coronation. A board member whispered to the CFO, $10 billion. He's unstoppable now. But the CFO didn't smile. No one should feel this untouchable, he murmured. Servers moved quietly between guests, carrying plates that cost more than their monthly rent. One server, a young man named Luis, working 2 jobs to help his sick mother, froze when he noticed Ethan raising a crystal glass. Luis had heard Ethan's rooftop speech earlier. He'd felt a sting he couldn't explain. Ethan tapped his glass. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth and sharp. "Tonight we celebrate the biggest victory in my company's history. $10 billion, 1 tower, and no miracles required." A few guests chuckled. Others shifted uncomfortably. He continued, "People always say success comes from above. Prayers, blessings." He scoffed, lifting his glass higher. "But I don't wait on heaven. I build my own, brick by brick, deal by deal. God didn't make this happen. I did." Some guests applauded wildly. Others stared at the tablecloth, unsure whether the chill in the room came from the air conditioning or the arrogance in his words. Margaret Hayes, seated near the end of the table, swallowed hard. She'd seen him climb so far, but she also knew how far he'd fallen inside. She whispered to the woman beside her, "He thinks this is strength, but it's just fear wearing a suit." Across from her, an aging investor leaned toward his wife. "He's daring God to answer," he whispered. "That never ends well." But Ethan didn't see any of it. Didn't see the unease, the sorrow, the silent prayers forming in the minds of people who still believed. He only saw admiration, power, validation. He downed the last of his drink, savoring it like victory itself. The night grew louder. More wine, louder laughter, bigger boasts. Ethan told the story of his rise from poverty to empire, leaving out every piece that hurt. The room roared at every joke. But Luis, the young waiter, kept glancing at him with something almost like pity. When Ethan stepped outside onto the rooftop balcony, overlooking the city he claimed to own, the wind pushed back his hair. He whispered to the skyline, "No God, no fate, only me." Far below, in the restless pulse of New York streets, a storm rolled quietly toward the horizon. No one at the celebration knew it yet, but this was the last night Ethan Walker would ever stand on top of the world he built. Within hours, the towers of pride he constructed would crack, beginning on a dark stretch of highway where Jesus Christ himself was already waiting. The celebration ended close to midnight, but the arrogance lingered on Ethan Walker's breath long after he stepped into the cold Manhattan air. His driver had been dismissed hours earlier. Ethan insisted he could drive himself home. "I built half this city," he scoffed. "I can handle a 12-mile highway." The valet hesitated as he handed over the keys to the black Cadillac Escalade. "Sir, are you sure you're okay to—" Ethan waved him off. "I'm fine. Go back to parking Toyotas." The SUV roared to life, headlights slicing through the night as Ethan pulled away. Behind him, the shimmer of Manhattan faded into a quiet stretch of road leading toward the I-90, where the wind grew colder and the sky darker than city lights ever allowed. Inside the car, Ethan loosened his tie and smirked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. $10 billion, he muttered, not bad for a man without a God. But as he merged onto the interstate, the laughter died. The road was unusually empty, a long ribbon of asphalt swallowed by shadows. The celebration music still echoed faintly in his mind, but the silence outside felt heavier than usual. unnatural almost. Miles away, a trucker named Ray Collins adjusted his grip on the steering wheel of his 18-wheeler. He'd been driving for 19 hours straight, eyelids growing heavier with each passing mile. His wife's voice message played on loop. "Come home safe, honey. The kids miss you." He blinked, fighting sleep. Then he drifted, just an inch, into the wrong lane. Back on the highway, Ethan's Escalade sped forward, cutting through pockets of fog that rolled in like ghosts across the pavement. He turned up the radio. Nothing. Static, as if the world itself was holding its breath. At 11:52 p.m., the impossible unfolded in less than 2 seconds. Ray's 18-wheeler veered fully into Ethan's lane. Ethan looked up, just in time to see blinding headlights tearing toward him. Metal screamed. Tires shrieked. The SUV swerved violently. The impact was brutal. The Escalade flipped once, twice, a third time, glass exploding like shrapnel across the night. When the world finally stopped spinning, the SUV lay upside down on the shoulder of the I-90, crushed nearly flat. The horn blared weakly, stuck somewhere in the mangled front end. Steam hissed through the twisted frame, mingling with the scent of gasoline. Ray Collins stumbled out of his truck, hands shaking, whispering, "Oh, Lord, please let whoever's in there be alive." Inside the wreck, Ethan was pinned, metal pressing into his ribs like a vice, his leg trapped, his chest collapsing with every breath. He tried to shout, but only a hoarse whisper escaped. The proud billionaire, the man who mocked God only hours earlier, was reduced to helplessness within seconds. On the empty highway, no cars passed, no sirens, no help. In only Ethan's labored, cracking voice, "Somebody, help me." Miles away, Margaret Hayes jolted awake in her bed, heart pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. She whispered a prayer she hadn't prayed in years. "Lord, don't let him die like this." And out there on the dark stretch of I-90, the wind shifted, as if something or someone had begun walking toward the broken SUV. Something that wasn't bound by distance or time or the pride of a man who thought he ruled the world. The moment had finally come. The wrecked Cadillac hissed like a dying beast, steam curling into the cold night air, as if the highway itself were exhaling grief. Inside, Ethan Walker hung upside down, blood dripping from his forehead, pooling onto the shattered glass beneath him. The seatbelt dug into his chest so deeply it felt like a fist squeezing his lungs from the inside. For the first time in decades, the man who believed he controlled everything couldn't move an inch. He tried the door. It didn't budge. He tried shifting his weight. A bolt of pain shot through his ribs, sharp enough to steal his breath. Somewhere in the distance, the faint engine of the jackknife truck groaned. The trucker, Ray Collins, was unconscious, slumped over his steering wheel. No other headlights appeared on the horizon. The interstate was a dead, silent vein through the darkness. Ethan's voice cracked. "Help! Somebody!" His phone lay 10 feet away in the dirt, screen glowing weakly, buzzing with missed calls he would never answer. His chest tightened. Every inhale felt like trying to breathe through a straw. Panic clawed its way up his throat. He wasn't used to this feeling. Helplessness, dependency, fear. In New York boardrooms, he was unstoppable. On magazine covers, he was unshakable. On television interviews, he was unbreakable. But here, on this dark stretch of I-90, the truth settled over him like a shroud. He was just a man, a fragile, bleeding man with no power left to save himself. A gust of wind blew through the broken window, cold as ice, rustling the scraps of paperwork scattered across the asphalt. The silence pressed on him like a weight. For a moment he thought of his mother, Linda, sitting alone in her small house, still praying for a son who never prayed for himself. He thought of his father, John Walker, who knelt by his bedside every night whispering, "Lord, protect my boy." He hadn't thought about those prayers in years. He'd buried them under money, steel, skyscrapers, and pride. Now, with blood running into his eyes and darkness creeping into his vision, Ethan faced a wall he couldn't climb, and something inside him cracked. Barely conscious, barely breathing, he whispered a sentence he never imagined would leave his lips. "God, if you're real, help me." The words broke apart as soon as they left his mouth, trembling between agony and disbelief. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't rehearsed. It was primal, desperate, ripped straight from a part of him he thought he had buried forever. Then the world went still. The wind stopped. The quiet deepened. Even the horn stuck against the crushed steering column finally died. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears. He waited. For a miracle. For a sign. For anything. Nothing came. He let out a bitter, broken laugh that dissolved into a sob. Of course. No one's listening. He squeezed his eyes shut, breath trembling, feeling his strength slip away like water through his fingers. But then, without warning, the air changed. The temperature shifted. A presence so heavy and yet so impossibly gentle settled over the wreck. Ethan's eyes snapped open. Through the shattered window, down the deserted highway, a faint white glow began to appear. Not headlights, not street lamps, something else. Someone. And unknowingly, Ethan Walker had just prayed his first real prayer in 29 years. A prayer heaven had already begun to answer. The glow on the highway wasn't the sharp white of oncoming headlights, nor the flashing colors of emergency vehicles. It was softer, warm, almost alive, spreading slowly across the asphalt like dawn, arriving too early. Ethan Walker blinked through the blood in his eyes, convinced the impact had scrambled his mind. But the light didn't fade. It grew. It moved. And then it took shape. A lone figure stepped out of the mist, calm, steady, barefoot, walking directly down the center of I-90, as if the night itself parted to make room. His robe, simple and pale, shimmered faintly under the broken moonlight. Long dark hair brushed his shoulders. His steps were silent, and somehow, the air itself bowed around him. 3 miles away, a highway maintenance worker named Clint Harper was adjusting cones near an exit ramp when he froze mid-motion. A strange warmth swept over him, so sudden and peaceful he nearly dropped his flashlight. He didn't know why, but he whispered, "Someone holy is near." Back at the wreck, Ethan's heart pounded against the crushed frame, yelling for more space. His vision blurred, breath jagged and shallow. "Help!" he croaked. "Please, somebody!" The figure drew closer. At 20 yards, Ethan squinted harder. At 10 yards, the trembling in his chest shifted, from fear to something deeper, something ancient. At 5 yards, he saw his face, and everything inside him unraveled. The man's eyes didn't look young or old. They looked eternal, filled with a love deeper than oceans and a sorrow older than mountains. They held the weight of every prayer Ethan ignored, and every cry his father ever whispered at the edge of a worn-out bed. When the man finally reached the shattered window, he bent down. Glass crunched softly under his feet, yet he didn't seem wounded. Not even dust clung to him. Ethan gasped, voice cracking. Who are you?" The man didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at the billionaire, the man pinned beneath steel and pride, and his gaze carried both truth and tenderness. When he finally spoke, his words vibrated through the wreck, through Ethan's bones, through the night itself. "Why do you call me now, Ethan, when you've spent a lifetime saying I do not exist?" The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It resonated like a memory Ethan had forgotten he remembered. Far down the road, trucker Ray Collins stirred in his cab. A warmth washed over his unconscious body, steadying his breathing. He whispered one word without waking. "Jesus." Inside the SUV, Ethan's mind spiraled. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. And yet, deep in his chest, beneath the brokenness, beneath the fear, something recognized him. The man placed a hand gently on the twisted metal, crushing Ethan's ribs. His touch didn't bend the steel. It didn't spark or glow. Instead, a warmth spread from his fingers through Ethan's body, like the first moment a child realizes he is safe. Ethan choked on a sob he didn't know he'd held for decades. The man spoke again, softer this time. "I have heard every cry you denied, every plea you buried, every wound you refused to show." Ethan's vision blurred. Tears, real tears, the kind he hadn't shed since he was 17, standing over his father's coffin. "I didn't think you cared," Ethan whispered. I didn't think you listened. The man's eyes softened. I was there the day your father prayed over you for the last time. I was there when you buried your faith under concrete and steel. And I am here now, because you finally called my name. The wind fell silent. The night held its breath. And Ethan Walker, king of New York's skyline, master of iron and glass, looked into the eyes of Jesus Christ and felt his entire life tilt toward a truth he had spent years running from. For the first time, he didn't see a myth. He didn't see a story. He didn't see a symbol. He saw the one who had never left him, the one walking toward him long before he ever thought to ask for help, the one who had come tonight, not to punish, but to save. And the highway, lonely, broken, forgotten, became holy ground. The air around the wreck grew unnaturally still, as if the entire highway were holding its breath. Jesus Christ knelt beside the crushed SUV, his robe brushing against shards of glass that somehow never touched him. Ethan Walker lay suspended in the twisted metal, chest tight, breath shallow, but suddenly aware of something deeper than pain, something ancient stirring inside him. Jesus placed his hand gently on the steel, pressing into Ethan's ribs. The warmth that spread through Ethan's body wasn't physical. It was something older than memory, something he couldn't name but desperately longed for. Why are you here? Ethan whispered, voice breaking. Jesus didn't answer immediately. He looked at him, not at the bruises, not at the blood, not at the brokenness. He looked at the soul underneath. Because you finally spoke to me, he said softly, for the first time since you were 17. Ethan's breath hitched. How did you? Jesus continued, his voice like calm water over stone. The night your father died, you asked me why I didn't save him. Because you didn't, Ethan snapped, a sudden surge of anger rising through the fear. He prayed every night. He begged you for help, and he still died on that living room floor. Silence fell again, not cold, not empty, just patient. Jesus' eyes held a sorrow so deep it made Ethan tremble. Your father did not lose, Jesus said gently. He came home to me. Ethan's voice cracked. He suffered. We starved. My mother worked herself half to death. I carried everything alone. Where were you then? Jesus leaned closer. Beside you. Ethan shook his head violently, tears cutting lines through the dirt on his face. No, you weren't. I crawled out of that house by myself. I built everything alone. Jesus studied him with infinite compassion. You built towers to forget your pain. You built wealth to bury your wounds. You built a kingdom because you thought love had abandoned you. A sob escaped Ethan's throat. Jesus continued, his voice firm yet filled with mercy. Your father's prayers did not fail. They brought you here, to this night, to this moment, to me. Ethan's chest tightened, not from injury, but from decades of walls collapsing. What do you want from me? He whispered. Jesus shook his head slowly. Nothing. Another pause. But I want something for you. Ethan swallowed hard. What is that? Peace. The word echoed inside him like a bell. Jesus' hand moved from the metal to Ethan's chest, right over his heart. The warmth deepened, almost unbearable yet healing. Ethan felt memories flood through him. His father's laugh, his mother's prayers, the dusty Oklahoma sunsets he tried to forget. And underneath it all, a truth he had buried so deep it almost died. He had never stopped wanting God. He had only stopped believing God wanted him. Jesus' voice softened, warm as a sunrise. You hid your wounds behind steel and concrete. You hid your fear behind arrogance. You hid your brokenness behind success. But I have seen every moment, every tear, every night you pretended you were unbreakable. Ethan's tears flowed freely now. I'm so tired, he whispered. Jesus nodded gently. Then let me carry what you can't. Ethan didn't know how to respond. For the first time in decades, he finally felt seen, fully, painfully, beautifully seen. Through blurry vision, he whispered the question that had haunted him his entire life. Why me? Why now? Jesus held his gaze. Because you called for me, he said softly. And because I never stopped waiting for you. The wind stirred warm again. Something holy filled the broken space between them. And on that dark stretch of I-90, Ethan Walker, billionaire, skeptic, self-made king, felt his soul opening to the one who had never left his side. The highway was silent, too silent, as Jesus Christ's hand remained over Ethan Walker's shattered chest. The warmth spreading from his touch wasn't heat or fire. It was something deeper, something that reached bone and memory, and the parts of a man even he didn't know were broken. Ethan's breathing steadied, not because the metal loosened, but because fear itself loosened its grip on him. Down the road, trucker Ray Collins stirred awake, clutching his chest as a strange wave of peace washed over him. He didn't know why he whispered, "Thank you, Lord," but the words escaped before he could think. Back at the wreck, Jesus looked directly into Ethan's eyes swollen with tears that had waited 29 years to fall. "Ethan," he said softly, "you asked why your father suffered, why you were left alone, why your heart hardened." Ethan could barely hear his own rasping breath. "Yes." Jesus' voice was steady, almost like a whisper carried through the centuries. "Because miracles do not prevent suffering. They transform the ones who survive it." A wind swept gently across the highway, warm, fragrant, impossible. The scent reminded Ethan of Oklahoma summers, of his father's workshop, of prayers he used to believe in. Jesus continued, "You built towers to escape your pain, but pain follows those who refuse to face it. Now, you have faced it." Ethan swallowed, tears dripping onto the glass shards beneath him. What happens now?" Jesus lifted his hand from Ethan's chest and placed it instead on the twisted beam crushing his ribs. He didn't push the metal aside. He didn't bend it. Instead, a glow, soft, golden, spread outward from his fingers. The metal didn't move, but Ethan did. The pressure in his lungs eased. His ribs felt lighter. The crushing weight faded, not physically, but spiritually. It was as if the steel no longer held authority over his life. Jesus' voice deepened, filled with an authority that made the night tremble. "Ethan Walker, your life is not over. I am giving you a second chance. Not because you earned it, but because grace is stronger than pride." Tears blurred Ethan's vision. "I don't deserve that." Jesus smiled, gentle, knowing. "No one deserves grace. That is why it is called grace." Then something changed. From far away, distant at first but growing louder, came the sound of sirens, cutting through the night, slicing through the silence, racing toward the wreck. Emergency crews, an ambulance. Help he could never have reached himself. Jesus glanced toward the sound. "They are coming for your body," he said softly, "but I came for your soul." A sob tore from Ethan's throat. "I want to change," he whispered. "Please, don't leave me the way I was." Jesus stepped back, his form radiant against the darkness. "Then live differently, Ethan. Give what you withheld. Love what you abandoned. Heal what you broke." Ethan nodded through tears. "I will. I promise." Jesus leaned close, voice now almost a breath. "Then you will live." The lights of the approaching ambulance spilled across the road. Just as Ethan blinked, Jesus began to fade, light dissolving into the night, like mist touched by dawn. "Wait!" Ethan cried. Will I see you again?" A final whisper echoed through his soul. "You will see me every time you choose compassion over pride, mercy over power, and love over fear." And then he was gone. Paramedics rushed toward the wreck. "Alive! We've got a live one!" one of them shouted. They cut through the metal, pulled Ethan free, and froze in disbelief. He should have been dead. He should have been crushed. He should have been broken beyond repair. But his injuries were shockingly mild, nothing matching the violence of the wreck around him. And on his wrist, glowing faintly in the flashing red lights, was a perfect imprint of a cross. Not burned, not bruised, but marked, as if placed there by light itself. Ethan stared at it, chest trembling with awe. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a god. He felt saved. The first thing Ethan Walker felt when consciousness returned was light, warm, almost golden, pressing gently against his eyelids. The beeping of a heart monitor filled the room in slow, steady intervals. The sheets smelled of antiseptic. His ribs ached, but the crushing pain from the highway was gone. He opened his eyes. A hospital ceiling stared back at him. For several seconds, he didn't understand where he was. Then the night on I-90 rushed in, metal twisting, the truck's headlights, his own desperate whisper. God, if you're real, help me. And then, Jesus, the hand on his chest, the warmth, the voice, the cross. He touched his wrist instinctively. The mark was still there, clear, impossible, undeniable. A soft gasp to his right broke his trance. Sitting in a cheap plastic chair, wrapped in a second-hand sweater, was Linda Walker, his mother. Her hair was thinner now, her back slumped with years of hard work, and her eyes, red, swollen, exhausted, watched him with the fragile hope only a mother can hold. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, hands trembling as she stood. Thank God you're awake." But Ethan didn't feel like a titan or a CEO or a king of skyscrapers. He felt like a son who had been gone far too long. "Mom," his voice cracked. He hadn't said that word with softness since he was a teenager. She rushed to him, gripping his hand as if it were the last lifeline she had. Tears streamed down her face, tears of fear, relief. In a love that had survived every cold year, he pushed her away. "I prayed," she said through sobs. "I prayed every night that God would bring you home. I thought I lost you." Ethan swallowed, the weight in his chest heavier than any steel beam he ever built. "I'm sorry, Mom." She froze. "I'm so sorry." His voice broke completely. "For not calling, for not visiting, for making you feel like you didn't matter, for thinking money meant more than you, for everything." Linda cupped his face, her hands warm and trembling. "Ethan, sweetheart, I forgave you long before you apologized. A mother's heart doesn't keep score." But Ethan shook his head, tears finally falling. "No, I hurt you, and I hurt Dad's memory, and I hurt myself." Linda brushed the hair from his forehead like she used to when he was a boy. "What matters," she said softly, "is you're here now, alive, and I know who saved you." Ethan met her eyes, and for the first time in his life, he didn't hide the truth. "I saw him, Mom." His lips trembled. "I saw Jesus." She didn't gasp. She didn't question. She simply closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." A knock interrupted the moment. Margaret Hayes, his longtime assistant, stepped into the room holding flowers that looked far too humble for a billionaire CEO. When she saw Ethan awake and crying, she covered her mouth with her hand. "Sir, I—" But Ethan shook his head. "Margaret," he said softly, "I don't want you to call me sir anymore." She blinked, stunned. He continued, voice raw and sincere. "I treated you like you were part of the furniture in my life, like your time and your family didn't matter. I'm sorry. You deserved better from me. You deserve better." Her eyes filled instantly. "Ethan, that means more than you know." Another figure appeared in the doorway, Ray Collins, the trucker, bandaged, limping, but alive. He hesitated, unsure if he was welcome. Ethan motioned him in. "You saved my life," Ethan said. Ray shook his head. "No, sir, someone else did that. I just crashed into you." They both shared a trembling, humbled laugh. The room felt quiet, warm, sacred, like something holy lingered there still. Ethan looked around at the people he had pushed away for years. His mother, his assistant, a stranger who nearly died beside him, and something inside him settled. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, he felt whole. Not because he survived, but because he finally understood what living meant. The healing had begun. And this time, it wasn't a hospital that healed him. It was grace. 1 month after the accident, New York City woke to a headline no one expected. Not on business pages, not in political circles, not even among the gossip columns that followed billionaire drama like sport. Ethan Walker announces the Walker Hope Foundation, a $500 million pledge to rebuild the lives America forgets. Executives spit out their coffee. Investors panicked. News anchors stuttered through scripts. And on the 78th floor of Walker Tower, employees whispered, "Is he dying? Is he broke? Has he lost his mind?" But Margaret Hayes, standing quietly outside the press room, knew the truth. She had seen it in Ethan's eyes ever since he left the hospital. Eyes no longer cold steel, but something gentler, humbled, awakened. Inside the studio, Ethan stood before reporters with no designer watch, no custom suit, no arrogance polished into armor. Just a simple navy blazer, a cross faintly visible on his wrist, and a new stillness that unsettled everyone watching. "Good morning," he began, voice steady. "Before I speak about numbers, projects, or blueprints, I need to tell you why I'm standing here." The room fell silent. 1 month ago, I should have died on Interstate 90. The doctors know it. The investigators know it. I know it. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "But surviving didn't change me," he continued. He glanced at his wrist, the faint mark of the cross glowing under the lights. "Meeting Jesus Christ did." Cameras clicked furiously. Some reporters scoffed, but Ethan didn't waver. "For 29 years, I lived as though I built myself, as though money made me invincible, as though God was a story told to comfort weaker men." His voice cracked, but only slightly. "I was wrong." A young journalist in the front row felt her breath catch. She had lost her brother in a crash 2 years earlier. Hearing a CEO confess this, it shook her. Ethan continued, "I'm not giving away money to look good. I'm giving because I was given something. Something I never deserved. Mercy, a second chance, a reason to live for more than my bank account." Behind him, a screen lit up with a new logo. The Walker Hope Foundation. Building homes, rebuilding lives, restoring dignity. "We will build communities," he declared. "Affordable homes, training centers, shelters for veterans, recovery facilities. And I won't build them for people. I'll build them with people." A construction worker watching from a Bronx bar whispered, "Man, I never thought I'd hear Ethan Walker talk like that." A single mother in Buffalo wiped her eyes. "Someone finally sees us." A homeless veteran under a Chicago bridge muttered, "Lord, is this real?" Ethan clicked to the next slide. Photographs of rundown neighborhoods, shelters bursting beyond capacity, veterans sleeping on cardboard, widowed mothers choosing between rent and food. "These are the people I ignored," he said softly. "I built towers that reached the clouds while families below slept in the shadows." A long silence followed before he lifted his gaze. "No more." He announced the first project, Hope Haven, a 120-home community for struggling families in upstate New York. Then the John Walker Skills Academy, named after his father, teaching carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, real trades, real jobs, real dignity. In the back of the room, Linda Walker pressed her hand over her heart, tears streaming. Hearing her husband's name spoken with honor again nearly brought her to her knees. Ethan wasn't finished. He pledged a scholarship fund for children of construction workers, a partnership with churches and nonprofits nationwide, programs for addiction recovery, food insecurity, and reentry support for former inmates. And then he ended with words no one expected from the man once crowned the king of concrete. "Success built my empire, but compassion will build my legacy. My towers will fade. My name will be forgotten. But every life rebuilt, each one is eternal. That is the work Jesus saved me for." For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then applause erupted, not polite, not forced, raw, emotional, rising like a wave. TV commentators scrambled to respond. Some called him delusional. Others called him inspired. But across the country, in living rooms, shelters, repair shops, truck stops, ordinary Americans felt hope flicker again. Ethan Walker walked off the stage not as a king, but as a servant, not to shareholders, not to his ego, but to the God who met him on a dark highway and rewrote the blueprint of his life. A new foundation had been laid, and this one was built on grace. Years passed, but the night on I-90 never faded, not for Ethan, not for the people he touched, and not for the quiet whispers that traveled through churches, shelters, and small-town diners about the billionaire who met Jesus on a highway. The Walker Hope Foundation grew beyond anything Ethan ever predicted. Homes rose from dust in forgotten neighborhoods. Addicts found sobriety. Veterans found belonging. Families torn apart by poverty found stability. And in every dedication ceremony, every ribbon cutting, Ethan always repeated the same words: "I didn't build this. Grace did." Those who once feared him now saw something entirely different. A man who walked slower, listened deeper, and smiled with a peace that didn't come from boardrooms or billion-dollar contracts. Margaret Hayes, still by his side, often whispered to new staff, "You're seeing a miracle in motion. Don't take it lightly." His mother, Linda, lived long enough to witness her son restore what money had stolen: humility, tenderness, faith. On Sunday mornings, she sat beside him in church, holding his hand as if she were afraid God might take him away again. And Ethan spoke of Jesus not as a distant figure, not as a theology, but as someone he had seen, someone he had known, someone who had stepped into a wrecked SUV to pull a lost man back from the edge of hell. But the moment that sealed his legacy came 3 years after the accident. On a crisp autumn morning, Ethan returned to the exact spot on I-90 where everything changed. Not with cameras, not with reporters, just alone, except for one man. Ray Collins, now fully recovered and working as a safety instructor, met him with a thermos of coffee. "You sure you want to be here, Ethan?" Ray asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "I need to." They walked to the faded skid marks where metal screamed and lives almost ended. Ethan knelt, older now, calmer, and placed his hand over the cold asphalt. "Thank you," he whispered. Ray stepped back, giving him space. He had never heard a billionaire pray like that. The wind shifted, not strong, not dramatic, just a soft breeze that brushed Ethan's face like a familiar hand. He looked up, and for a moment, only a heartbeat, he saw him, not in full form, not with blinding glory, but in a shimmer of warm light at the edge of the highway, standing the way he had that night, quiet, steady, loving. Jesus didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. "I never forgot you. I never left you. And I never will." Ethan blinked, and the figure faded with the sunlight. But the peace remained, settling deep in his bones like a final, gentle blessing. Ray approached slowly. "Everything okay?" Ethan exhaled, eyes shining. "More than okay." They drove back toward the city, toward new projects, new lives, new grace. But as the skyline rose in the distance, Ethan realized something profound. He no longer saw skyscrapers he built to prove he didn't need God. He saw a mission, a calling, a reminder of the night Jesus stepped into the road for a man who had forgotten him, but whom he had never once forgotten. And wherever Ethan went, speaking in churches, building in poor towns, comforting broken families, he ended every story with the same final truth. If you feel lost, if you feel unworthy, if you think you've pushed God too far away, you haven't. I was a man who cursed heaven, but Jesus came for me anyway. He never forgot me, and he hasn't forgotten you either. The world remembered Ethan Walker as a billionaire turned builder of hope, but heaven remembered him as something far deeper, a son who finally came home. If this story touched your heart, even for a moment, take 1 second to like the video and subscribe to Stories of Grace. Your subscription is a seed of hope that helps us share more miracles, more healing, and more faith with those who need it most. Stay with us, because the miracles don't end here.